Hey guys, welcome back to episode 2 of Who's in the Chair. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe so you can catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so you can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so in the last video or the last episode, whatever you want to call it, I went through a list of close to a dozen different characters that it could have been sitting in that chair in the Batman Who Laughs one-shot tie-in. And a majority of that dozen are still viable candidates. And I say that because with all the twists that we've seen in Dark Knight's Metal so far, you really can't count anybody out. And this is one of those many mysteries, some of which we heard of from the very beginning of Metal and we're still watching unfold, much like your Plastic Man egg. And very much like that same case, we're giving little hints along the way that tell us a little bit more information, potentially leading up to Metal issue number 6, where we'll get the full payoff and the full reveal. And the crazy thing is, who knows if that's even guaranteed, because as a whole, primarily Dark Knight's Metal is focused around Batman. And without a doubt, Scott Snyder is using this opportunity to introduce new things to the DC multiverse, but there are a number of things happening in Metal that are not going to conclude in Metal issue number 6, but rather they'll continue to move forward and develop in DC Rebirth. And after Metal issue number 6, we'll definitely revisit that and talk about more of those elements that are reaching into the history and reaching into the future and just reshaping DC Comics in DC Rebirth. But for this video, I'm just gonna focus on the man in the chair. And he's not really even in a chair anymore at this point, he's just kind of getting dragged around. But since the last time we've seen him in Dark Knight's Metal, The Batman Who Laughs issue number 1, we see him once again in the Metal tie-in Dark Knight's Rising issue number 1. And at this point, with all the hints that we've gotten about him so far, and much of those I discussed in the previous video, link below, but in the latest issue of Dark Knight's Rising, we also get a few more hints on who this person is. One being that he's cosmic. 2, the Batman Who Laughs said he's possibly the most powerful being in the multiverse. And 3, he definitely has a significant connection to the House of Heroes, because the Batman Who Laughs risked his life and the other Nightmare Batman around him so that he could make this, quote, guy in the chair watch the destruction of the House of Heroes. And man, like, I'm really trying to point the finger elsewhere and come up with viable options for other characters, but it's like all roads lead back to Nix Uotan. And even while doing the last video about the Wild Hunt, aside from the few obvious pointers that I mentioned, I do believe that there are a couple other things that happened in that issue that were not so obvious pointers, but more so they played into as like hints as how the Batman Who Laughs was able to contain them. But before I dive into all that and make a little more sense out of why I believe it's Nix Uotan for the most part, first, we gotta talk about the original Monitor. And we talked about him some on this playlist for Dark Knight's Metal, mostly when we talked about the origin of Barbatos and we saw how these different characters tied into the Forge of Worlds. And so from there, connecting the original Monitor with Nix Uotan, it's in there where I feel like a bunch of these extra hints and clues start to pop up. And one of the clues concerning the original Monitor goes back to Crisis on Infinite Earths. And because his injuries from the anti-Monitor were so severe, he had to subdivide himself into different pieces. The first being Dax Novu, and then the rest divided into a race of Monitors. And these two are also referred to as the Probe and the Flaw. And the Flaw was first, which was Dax Novu. And from Dax, as a way to seal that flaw, he created this silent sentinel that looked just like Superman, but the purpose of the sentinel was to protect the people who were the other half or the remainder of the original Monitor. And this silent sentinel, so to speak, or this giant Superman, in that same equation, he's referred to as the Scab. And all we really know about the construction of this giant Superman, aside from Dax who created him and offered him as a gift to his people, but as far as its physical composition, it is made from divine metals. And this is something we could possibly see return at the conclusion of Dark Knight's Metal, but I'll talk more about that after we're done with Nix Uotan. But as far as Novu, who is Nix Uotan's father, who created this sentinel that was built for doomsday, literally, he was also the first to map the multiverse. And in the process of him doing this and going on his expeditions, he discovered that the Monitors were feeding off of these different Earths, destroying them. But also with him being out there and feeding directly off of the Bleed, which is the space where the universes sit together, where the Ultimate Fuel travels through, but with him instead feeding off the Bleed, that's when he started to take on this vampire-like figure, henceforth giving him the title Mandrak, the Dark Monitor. And with us seeing in Final Crisis what took place with Dax Nuvo, spending all that time in the Bleed and feeding from it, and literally becoming a multiverse level vampire, I can't help but think of his son, Nix Uotan, who currently in Dark Knight's Metal is with the Batman Who Laughs inside of the Bleed. In theory, of course, but Nix has also made clear that there's no limit to what he can do. Yeah, like he actually said that. But as far as him being so powerful but still being contained by the Batman Who Laughs, that really has to go back to his father's discovery of his people feeding off the multiverse. And at this point in Metal, with the majority of the multiverse gone dark, that would explain why he's weakened and unable to feed. Not to mention, if nothing else, it just looked like a black dude under them bandages, if nothing else. But anyway, with the majority of the multiverse gone dark, the positive multiverse, his only option aside from that is to feed from the bleed. And I would only assume that if he were to do that he would suffer the same fate as his father and become that crazy looking multi-universal vampire. And aside from obvious reasons, you know that he doesn't want to do that because one, his father killed his mother, but also with him being the last of the monitors, he had to take him out. And this took a combination of bringing together multiple Supermen from different Earths to burn him first, and then multiple Lanterns, making a single construct of a stake and driving it through his heart. And they all had to think of it at the exact same time. It was pretty dope. But on the flip side, I also think it would be crazy to see him become the thing that he hates in order to save the multiverse. Like, him having to do that alone would be so crazy. Just him making that decision as a last and only option to save the multiverse. And so my next reason is kind of like a 2-for-1, because once again, the Batman who laughs risks his own life and the other Nightmare Batman in order to make sure that this particular person sees the ultimate fuel crash into the House of Heroes. And it makes you think, why is it so important that this particular person sees the ultimate fuel, which is a vehicle which belongs to the monitors, crash into the House of Heroes, which also belong to the monitors? Like, what cosmic super powerful person would that mean the most to? I mean, as far as monitors go, there's really not a lot of people left, save one. So there you go. And so the next thing I want to address is the bandages and the reason why they cover him from head to toe. And as a reminder, this is just my assumption, but from being a descendant, if you will, of the original Monitor who created Dax as a defense because lacking defense was his flaw, quote unquote, and Dax went on to have Nix, who Nix said his father had him in order to stop himself. But from being a descendant from the original Monitor, it's very likely that he's just as vulnerable to antimatter, much like the original Monitor was. And because of that, with the addition of possibly concealing his identity, there's also the possibility that the Batman who laughs didn't want Nix to mix positive matter with antimatter, much like Barry Allen from Earth -52 mixed matter from the dark multiverse with matter from the light multiverse. Or at least he didn't want this to happen prematurely. And that will more so explain why in the Wild Hunt issue, why he's covered from head to toe. And I really feel like with that, it would make what happened with Barry Allen from Earth -52 not just seem pointless for him to appear then disappear, because this way it at least alludes to something else building up in the series. And as much as I would like for Barry Allen from Earth -52 to reappear in Metal, I don't think that's going to happen. And I do believe he'll be brought back because it would be a travesty to let this design just go to waste. But I don't believe he's going to be a key ingredient to the finale of Dark Knight's Metal, unless they just go all out and have everything happen in this one issue. But rather, I believe he's one of those things that's kind of being saved for later. But on the subject of certain things happening and foreshadowing another, a couple other things I think may come into play with this theory is one, Detective Chimp losing his intelligence and losing his immortality coming into play as like a pre-established footnote that says, okay, because the multiverse is going dark, certain characters who draw their power either from the multiverse or the Fountain of Youth, they're losing their abilities in this process. And who better to really use as an example for that than somebody on the opposite end of the power spectrum, and really take the time to explain that with this character without giving away the big surprise. And so the next nod I gotta mention is Dawnbreaker. And a while back I was talking with some of you guys on Twitter, and we were going back and forth about Dawnbreaker saying the Green Lantern Oath, the original oath, instead of the oath he created as Dawnbreaker, and how this was possibly a foreshadowing of him switching sides in the last issue. Because in the Wild Hunt, both him and the drowned Batman sound like they were both finna turn. And that panel in the Wild Hunt just reminds me of another panel in Final Crisis, both with the exact same color background, where in Final Crisis, the Green Lanterns came to fight alongside with Nix Uotan. So it could be something, could be nothing, just saying. But last thing, getting back to the topic of this Superman Sentinel that was created by Dax Novu, which is also referred to as Thought Robot, and I know y'all gonna have a field day with that in the comments. Probably said it stands for that hero over there. But either way, also going back to Final Crisis, the air quotes thought portion of Thought Robot more so refers to Limbo, and that's more so a place where everything is made up of ideas. And when this Sentinel was used, Captain Atom merged Superman with Ultraman, who merged in a collision of opposing qualities. And so I was really just thinking, and this may be just way off the wall, because this Thought Robot, which is super tall and made from divine metals, like this would be the perfect thing to rise up at the Forge of Worlds, possibly with Batman and Superman combined, or even a like version of either one going up against Hawkman, made of metal just like this guy going up against Hawkman. And I'm not gonna front, that is one metal clash that I would love to see, because both of these guys are huge, in the same way that Ultraman and Superman pulled this off by being opposing but similar. I feel like a similar instance can work out with Batman and Superman both being opposing but similar, and also covered in divine metal, just like this guy. But those are really my thoughts for part 2. I didn't go into some other characters that were mentioned in the comments, like the Presence or Dr. Fate. The Presence I kind of dismissed the quickest, because just how? Like, how would you even weaken him? And not just that, but his power is just so immense that it would just take away from everything. And as far as Dr. Fate, it just wouldn't line up, because he was searching for metal with the heroes at the same time that the man in the chair was with the Batman Who Laughs at Challenger's Mountain. Shazam is another one I X'd out as far as the guy in the chair, and mainly because of Nix lining up more with metal in the events that have happened previously. For one, I don't see them taking a steep turn like this from everything that's pointing at the monitors and just swinging it over like, here's Shazam, this is where he's been the whole time. Nah, I really don't see it going down like that. But if anything, the references from metal like the Rock of Eternity, Black Adam, things like those from metal will allude to what we see when we finally get the reveal of Shazam, whenever that may be. But for the most part, I believe more that's going to tie more into Darkseid and the New Gods, especially with Darkseid being restored at this point. But that's all I got for this one. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, who you guys think it may be, and aside from just the name, also tell me why you think it might be that person, so that way it's not like any just random thought just out the blue. And with the way that metal ties in so deep already with Crisis, Final Crisis, with a touch of multiversity, these guys are pulling a little bit of everything into this arc, so let me know what you guys think. I got links up for more Dark Knights metal videos. Holla at me in the comments, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.